Oaklandsocialist was privileged to interview Yaroslav Kovalchuk, who lives in western Ukraine. We started off by him sending a message of greeting to some Burmese refugees here in the Bay Area who organized a rally for Human Rights Day in Burma, in which they also recognized the crisis in Ukraine.
Anywhere in the world, we face dictatorships sort of trying to limit our freedom, either by military coup, as it happened in Myanmar, or by direct military action, as it happened in Ukraine now with Russian invasion. But regardless of the situation, there is international solidarity of defending freedom. And I'm more than happy that people who are from different part of the world realize it. And I also just want to say them, I feel solidarity with their fighting for their freedom against authoritarian regime. So I hope things will change for the better in Myanmar as well as in Ukraine.
And we know that it's not only political repression, but poverty, hunger, homelessness, all that is different forms of repression.
Ukraine is one of the, if not the poorest country in Europe. So, and the Russian invasion probably, and I'm certain, will deteriorate the situation. So we are, as one of the professors that I know calls Ukraine, the most northern state of the global south, because quite often people think about European states and that's something that, oh, you're probably not facing that much of poverty and probably pretty, feel better. But because of the last 8 years of war, limited war, not full-scale war as we face it now in Ukraine, since annexation of Crimea and war in Donbass, the situation in Ukraine deteriorated in terms of people well-being, public health care, and general poverty. I would say that war just amplified all the bad tendencies that were in Ukraine far and made them even worse. But war, I would say, it's maybe also an opportunity for us after it's over to rethink the policies that we had before, that we should maybe more social solidarity, that people maybe will care much more about each other, because right now we face that people volunteer, ready to sacrifice their resources, their time for others who are in need. So I do hope that this something that will change trends and policies that were before the war. And it's very early to talk about it. I know a lot of leftist activists who went to serve in the military to defend the country, who volunteer, so they may be trade union activists, but all these people just channel all of their resources for the war cause to defend Ukraine.
How do you explain why the trade unions and a left, maybe socialist movement did not develop prior to the invasion?
In the 90s and in early 2000s, Ukraine had several socialist or leftist parties in the mainstream politics that in one way or another became victims of oligarch politics. So we had Socialist Party, we had Communist Party, but Communist Party just served some oligarch interest, and Socialist Party just imploded and then was destroyed by the oligarchs in the end. And the problem with trade union activism is, I think, a general problem of most post-Soviet states, that you have this state-controlled trade unions that sort of control everything, and then you try to create your independent trade union, and it's hard to do. It requires a lot of resources. So many activists whom I know the left, they actually they feel that there's a lot of work to do and a lot of obstacles to do that, especially for grassroots activism. Not talking about mainstream politics, how you can affect that. So, I mean, there are social conditions for Ukraine maybe and people quite often support leftist politics. And another part of the story is that the Soviet Union sort of discredited leftism as a label, although people support many leftist policies. So that's another obstacle people face. But yeah, that's, as I said, very complex issue, but people were slowly doing something on the ground. It's an open question what they could do in the mainstream politics, but there were several initiatives, at least that I personally know, activists, who tried to do something and had some limited successes.
As I understand it, the main industrial area is in the east, and including in Donbass. And so that would, under normal circumstances, be the heart of trade union activity. So how did the situation in Donbass with the two breakaway so-called republics and so on, did that have an effect on developing a working class movement and also a trade union, independent trade unions?
As I said before, probably oligarchs, Ukraine killed it in late 90s, early 2000s, because Donbass was in the 90s one of the most politically active regions, because it's a region of miners, first of all, and miner strikes actually were quite effective and miners defending their rights in the 90s, but slowly regional elites and oligarchs took it under control. And in the 2000s, we didn't have any major strikes. From time to time, people organize something, but I feel like another problem, and I think it's relevant not only for People's Republic in Donbass, but also from other regions of Ukraine, working class interests were often sort of channeled in different directions. Because, for example, as it happened with Donbass People's Republic, even those grassroots initiatives that were to defend local working class interests were hijacked by Russian imperialism and Russian nationalists ideologies. And Russia is one of the main, proponents on the international scale of conservatism and authoritarianism right now. So that was their interest, and they channeled even these initiatives into Russian nationalism, imperialism, not different political movements of Ukraine, but rather Ukrainian nationalists as their main opponent. So they try to frame it, okay, you guys, your main interest is defending like Russian culture, whatever it is. And there, some Ukrainian nationalists that you want take your culture and your language from you. But for many politicians who try to sort of channel this different issues that people have, as I said, working class may have, first of all, what they care about is their social rights, but both Ukrainian politicians and Russian politicians, and Ukrainian politicians, I mean, politicians like Yanukovych, try to frame it as we are defending Russian language and Russian culture. So that's what they've been doing since 90s, after the collapse of the Soviet Union. So they try to make politics about that, rather other things. So I would say it happened before Yanukovych, and actually that's something that helped Yanukovych to come to power in the first place. He successfully channeled those interests in that direction, saying like, if you don't vote for me, those Ukrainian nationalists will come and force you to speak Ukrainian, not Russian. That's not what was happening, but they tried to create a fear of that.
The picture is painted here that it was the Ukrainian fascists who were the ones fighting against the two so-called breakaway republics. and the Ukrainian fascists alone?
I would say that Ukraine has an problem with far right, but not on the scale that's often depicted by Russia, used by Russia. Current President Zelensky actually fired the previous Interior Ministry Avakov, who actually was covering for Azov. The Azov battalion exists, and it's been fighting in Donbass since 2014, but it's only one battalion, and like there are most of the Ukrainian military is just, regular Ukrainians, quite often without any ideological affiliation. So yeah, that's a problem, but it's only one battalion, and it's actually survived because of its patronage that it enjoyed from the former interior minister, while there were other far-right paramilitary groups which actually shrinked gradually because they didn't have that patronage.
Here also the left, or some on the left, make a big issue out of Bandera, and that he's like considered a national hero and that sort of thing.
Because you've got one guy who sort of represents it, and he became sort of a symbol, and Russia used it in 2014 and even earlier, but 2014 after Maidan, and many people actually not knowing much about who is Bandera, but saying like, oh, Russians say that's like it's bad, so I will support him, not being actually Ukrainian nationalists at all. So Russia actually played for that Ukrainians, not knowing much about, is he a Nazi collaborator? And he was actually, that's a very problematic figure. But actually, I'd say that's first of all, like Russia's responsibility for that, and some of the Ukrainian local nationalist politicians who are sort of playing into that. So it's mutual, but as I said, it's part of the internal debate. I wouldn't say that people en masse like Bandera. It still remains a controversial figure, and people, when you bring it up and people start, talking about like, oh man, no, he worked for the Nazis and that's a problem, say, but he resisted Russia, the Soviet Union, and then, people throw arguments, but there is no, consensus or support for this figure. And still, as with Azov battalion, that's an issue that should be discussed and is discussed in Ukrainian society, but Russia just opportunistically used it. Russian military actions just play into it that, oh, if Russians say he's bad, probably he's good for us. Right. And people don't go and actually what he as a politician was about.
How do you see things developing there, militarily and politically also, I guess?
So far, I feel like that people are here, despite the fact it's more than 2 weeks, they're cautiously optimistic, because no one expected that Ukrainian army will, hold up the defense for more than 2 weeks, losing only one regional center in the south, and Russians not being able to capture any major city. That gives an optimism, but there is sort of another side of it, that because Russia adopted this bombardment of like residential areas, and many people losing their houses, seeing all these horrible images and basically fleeing from the combat zone, it's sort of people are scared too. But I don't feel that people are sort of scared that we want to, we want to just give up to Russians. No, it's just rather people are feel getting angrier at Russians, that they are doing that they are not just conducting, military operations to defeat, Ukrainian army, but they are attacking civilians for no good reasons. And they are claiming they came to defend it. In the first place, people are saying, no, you no need to defend us. And now they're actually killing civilians en masse. And that's a grim picture that gets people scared a bit, but I would say even more angry, especially after a successful defense. So I can definitely describe you mood and how people are ready, even if some major cities could be lost, people are ready to fight.
What's your view of the U.S. and other NATO countries providing arms for Ukraine?
To be honest, before this all started, I wasn't a big fan of NATO. I still consider it an imperialist force, but its influence here, for some reason, I consider it positive, because it's hard to imagine that Ukraine would survive without Western arms. Sure, it's in their own interest, and maybe some Western imperialism is mixed here, but being person on the ground, I can see how you can use it to fight another imperialism. That's imperialism that's right in your face and ready to invade your territory and actually more directly destroy your freedom. So when you can use it, and I would say that's something that I couldn't imagine I would say a year ago. I support NATO policy of giving arms to Ukraine. That's something that really helps Ukrainian army to be successful. Definitely, I expect some influence that they would enjoy, but there is a room to fight it. And that, you know, for conventional politics and how we can participate, and yeah, so not idealizing NATO and saying that's like heaven and like, oh, they're so great, but being thankful for the help and keeping in mind our political rights too.
Right. Are you all, are people there in any contact with people inside Russia?
Some Russians said that's something unimaginable, and they feel ashamed that it's horrible that's going on, right? And they do not support Putin. I heard people saying that, you have Nazis in power, and that people trying to explain them, no, we got like our president's basically a Jew, secularized but Jew, and he actually didn't have any policies that would support any Ukrainian nationalism or whatever. But it's hard to convince people who believe, first of all, in like Russian TV. In my case, because most of my friends are leftists, or at least liberal leftists from Russia, and they're already critical about Putin's regime, and they demonstrate solidarity, and actually some of them donated money to support Ukrainian refugees. So that's also a tragedy in this situation, that societies were very close to each other, and just Putin decided to create chasm that I don't know how deep it will go, and it basically dividing some families.
You have some other observations you'd like to add?
I would be more happy if it was under better circumstances, but people showing their sympathy and solidarity with Ukrainian people fighting against Russian invasion, that's something that also inspires to continue whatever you do just to fight back. So I think me definitely, but other Ukrainians appreciate any support that people give to Ukrainians. That's it.
Well, sometimes it takes a great shock to wake people up, you know?
Yeah.
And you said, when we started this discussion, you commented about, it's up to us Ukrainians to decide, or something to that effect, how we want society to move. But we know that it's never in reality, big business, or what I would call the capitalist class, operates internationally. And just like you explained how Putin, who's a representative of the Russian oligarchs, operates internationally, and the US also. And so my view is, yes, it's up to the workers in every country to make their decision, but we also, as a working class, are international, and we have to operate internationally also. What's your thoughts on that?
I agree, and something of for me was always important to overcome these national boundaries that we often have, and to fight a bigger evil, or that I would agree with you, it's capitalism, and we have just different faces of it in a way, with with Putin being more authoritarian proponent, or China, or US having a different approach. But yeah, in any conflict that we have on our planet, we should always look for people defending their rights to decide for themselves what to do and how we can help them, but also building these ties, international ties, that will help us build global just society. And Ukrainian fight, on the one hand, yes, it's a conflict between Ukraine and Russia, but on the other hand, I see it also as more global conflict between authoritarianism and bigger either political or like companies or whatever, like trying to crush local community and to subdue them to their own interest. That's something that we all can build our international solidarity on and support each other. So I wholeheartedly agree with you.
And learn from each other also. Yeah. So, well, on that note, I want to thank you very much, Yaroslav, for taking the time. And I hope that we will stay in touch in the future.
Okay, thank you very much for this interview.